I do feel for Knicks fans a sense of confidence that whether it's Detroit, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Oklahoma City, whether it's San Antonio, what is thrown at them, they're going to try to have solutions. It really felt for a long time like this was just going to be last season all over again. And to me, that's the main takeaway of the 76ers series. You look at the lineup combinations, you look at the different ways they played. This team has always been a team that was going to thrive because of their diversity and depth of talent. And all things are sort of coming together at the right time.
They're getting everything they could want right now. They're getting Towns being maximized, something you and I have talked about constantly, pulling away rim protectors, accessing his elite passing skill, Brunson toggling on and off the ball as an initiator, as a facilitator, or as a spacer, as a cutter, OG playing defense as a helper, as a wing stopper, as well as shooting an elite three ball right now, having the best finishing season of his entire life. Mikal Bridges bouncing back from the worst basketball of his season to all of a sudden his best basketball of the season, cutting, hitting mid-rangers. Obviously, like I said, Josh Hart taking and making catch and shoot threes. Deuce and Shamet dialed in, looking like complete snipers. Mike Brown pushing the buttons, as you said. They're getting the most out of the talent that they have, that you and I have talked about as one of the top most talented teams in the league, and just a complete underrated team in terms of how talented they are. And because of that, I genuinely think this is the Knicks' best chance to win a title in my entire life. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, I'm joined by my brother and co-host, Geoff. And Geoff, the New York Knicks are in the Eastern Conference Finals once again. They got there in a much more, in my opinion, impressive way. Of course, the teams weren't as good potentially, but just the way that they're playing, the style that they're playing, the maximization and optimization, two buzzwords that I would dare say you and I coined over the past season that are used very heavily now in the zeitgeist. But jokes aside, this team is really looking dominant. And the question is, how much of it is a result of the teams that they're playing, the coaches that they're playing, the way that coaches are deploying defenses against them? And how much of it is what Mike Brown has installed, how the players for the Knicks are playing, and whether they can carry that over? I will let you get us started as always and choose where we go. But for my money, the Knicks look legit. They look like one of the best teams in the league, and I don't see a reason why that won't carry over moving forward.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up, like, I don't really have any interest in comparing like this run to last one. I know you weren't really trying to do that too much, but it's just, I'm not gonna, it's not totally different eras or anything. It's just different seasons. It's just focusing on this season. I think it's funny that you brought up like opposing coaches and what they're doing, because we had a little laugh this afternoon when Nick Nurse in the third quarter was like exacerbated in his seat when Karl-Anthony Towns found a cutter in the paint for like the fifth straight possession, and the paint's wide open as Embiid staying attached to Towns, and Nurse is like, why aren't they guarding this? And it's like, it's like, dude, like, you can do something about there. You can try to stop. It was very interesting how Philly, I mean, it seemed like they almost just accepted defeat. Like, it really, really felt that way. And look, the Knicks destroyed them. Like the Knicks actually just dismantled them. That must have been very dispiriting. It must have felt, from the Sixers' perspective, like they're very far away. And you've got Embiid getting a little over the hill. Maxey, clearly the team's going in the direction of building around Maxey. But the Knicks deserve credit for going in there and taking it. And as far as what you're talking about with how much of this going forward can carry over, I think you hit the nail on the head, because we've been talking about this group of players for 2 seasons, and we talk about how they do versus certain coverages, how they're going to do versus certain strategies. And I think Mike Brown deserves a lot of credit in terms of the Knicks seem to just have an answer all the time for whatever is being thrown at them. It was like a switch flipped after game 3 against Atlanta, and they lose a couple close games. They're down 2-1. And then all of a sudden, just a juggernaut has been created. And I'm not saying they're locked to win the championship or even the East. But I do feel for Knicks fans a sense of confidence that whether it's Detroit, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Oklahoma City, whether it's San Antonio, what is thrown at them, they're going to try to have solutions. And it really felt like for a long time in the second half of the season, like it wasn't going to go that way. Like this was just going to be last season all over again. And in a sense, just putting all their chips in one basket. And to me, that's the main takeaway of the 76ers series is you look at the minutes, you look at the lineup combinations, you look at the different ways they played. This team has always been a team that was going to thrive because of their diversity and depth of talent and the different ways they can play, the different strengths they can lean into. And I really, really, really feel like all things are sort of coming together at the right time. And they've kind of realized that because Mike Brown is switching it up. He's going to, the Mitch Towns lineup some. He's going to Towns at the 5 with shooters some. There really doesn't seem to be a button that he's afraid to push. And I don't know if the regular season, they sort of knew they had this and they were sitting on it. That's totally possible. I don't know if maybe they felt a certain sense of comfort being up huge in these series. They felt they were better then, and maybe they're going to play Detroit and they're going to revert. Like that's totally possible too. But right now, sitting here analyzing this team, it feels really, really positive, and it feels like they can just handle whatever's thrown at them.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. To something that you said a little bit, like at the top of your monologue there was, I actually do want to compare the teams from last year and this year personally, and not in terms of outcome, right? So like what I'm always going to look at, and you're generally in the same bucket as me, obviously, is I'm going to look at like the process. We're going to look at deployment. We're going to look at the strategies that are deployed. We're going to look at, countering in a series and adjustments and all of those kinds of things. You and I had an episode not too long ago, really, maybe like right before the playoffs started, and it suggested in the title, the Knicks might be hiding their best version. And if I was going to do some narrative making, like obviously we don't know this to be true, but I try to like look at the evidence in front of us and just reconcile things as our audience knows that I always try to do, like, how do I make this make sense? And early in the season, I felt Mike Brown was putting on an amazing performance. I thought we saw some of the beginnings of the stuff that we've seen with Towns at the 5 playing, in this orchestrator, playmaker, Domantas Sabonis, if you will, role where he was more of a hub and distributing, and the Knicks offense looked a little better. Jalen Brunson off the ball a lot, and all this stuff that we saw from them early in the season, it was like, man, this looks like such a better team. And they look like they're getting deployed in a way that is just so much better, like miles better. That being said, like you said, the second half of the season, it looked like that went away. It was like, wait a second, what happened to this team that seemed so excited, that seemed like had turned the corner? And it seemed like the way that they were being utilized was so much more appropriate to the personnel that they had. And it seemed like it went away. And that's where this idea of like, are they saving this? Are they waiting for the playoffs to? And then you get here, and the first couple of games were a little bit shaky, but then you see that the way that they went, they said, wait a second, let's go back to that stuff that was working. And they did. Karl-Anthony Towns as a playmaking hub, and everything else clicking into place around that. And to me, I do want to compare the teams, and again, not based on a results standpoint, but just in the way that they're approaching, the way that they're deploying, the way that they look like as a cohesive unit, right? And to me, we always talk about, how if Josh Hart is taking and making threes, this is one of the best teams in the NBA, bar none, right? But they just got that in this closeout game. But they're getting everything they could want right now. They're getting Towns being maximized, something you and I have talked about constantly. People have talked about it as a myth. Oh, you're always talking about maximizing Towns. Towns is just Towns. Yeah, no, this is what maximizing Towns looks like. Towns being maximized as a spacer, pulling away rim protectors, accessing his elite passing skill, Brunson toggling on and off the ball as an initiator, as a facilitator, or as a spacer, as a cutter. OG, when he's playing defense as, as a helper, as a wing stopper, as well as shooting an elite 3-ball right now, having the best finishing season of his entire life. He's at 67% at the rim this season on really good volume, even higher in the playoffs, getting to the free throw line like he never has in his career. 3.6 free throw attempts per 75 in the regular season, up to almost 5 per 75 in the playoffs, while his career high is 3 prior. Mikal Bridges bouncing back from the worst basketball of his season to all of a sudden his best basketball of the season, cutting, hitting mid-rangers, being aggressive, being a ball handler in some cases. Like, obviously, like I said, Josh Hart taking and making catch and shoot threes, not dribbling around and looking for a shot and then pulling it, like just shooting it off the catch, being aggressive. Deuce and Shamet dialed in, looking like complete snipers. Mike Brown pushing the buttons, as you said, learning, countering, adjusting, all of those things in real time. To me, all of this puts them in the OKC tier because they're getting the most out of their talent pool. They're getting the most out of the talent that they have, that you and I have talked about as one of the top most talented teams in the league, and just a complete underrated team in terms of how talented they are. They're finally getting the most out of that. And because of that, I genuinely think this is the Knicks' best chance to win a title in my entire life. I genuinely believe that, based on the deployment and based on, in comparison to last year where they had a similar roster, I did not feel like that because they weren't being deployed in this way. And so I think that is a huge difference. That's how I would compare the two teams.
I think that's totally fair. I think in a way, to analyze the Knicks, it is helpful to say, here's what they look like when they were playing to 75, 80% of their potential. If we're going to say, man, there's just so much meat left on the bone, there's low-hanging fruit to grab, then there's no better way to show that they have grabbed it than comparing them to a different version or a different, like the same iteration, but under a different coaching staff or using different deployment, different tactics. So that's totally fair. And I completely agree with you. Like, across the board, this has been almost jarring to watch. I know people say all the time, you play who's in front of you, and point differential matters because the elite teams are the ones who destroy the teams that they're supposed to beat. They're not just winning these games. This is the second straight series that they've gone on the road and just completely embarrassed the opponent. And that's, again, it just is looking up so much for them. And I talked a little bit about this on the live stream, but I know our audience, I can't expect our whole audience to be there for the live stream. So I want to reiterate a point I made on the live stream. I think a lot of credit to what we're talking about, what you're talking about, of course, goes to Mike Brown and what he's done. But after that, I think a lot of credit goes to Jalen Brunson. And I want to focus on him for a second because it's funny, because I think that there are outside fans who would call Brunson overrated, and then there are Knicks fans who would call Brunson underrated. And it's just such an interesting dynamic of like trying to analyze him objectively. But I think that whether you're on the in or you're on the out in terms of like rooting for him or how biased you may be, most people would assume that the majority of his offensive impact and his offensive value comes from like what he does with the ball in his hands and how he's scoring, which is maybe fair, or at least in past seasons fair. But I think this whole thing is working because of what you said about how Brunson is sort of scaling up and down and toggling on and off ball. And that's something I don't think anybody's really given him credit for. And I think that this doesn't work unless Brunson identifies that this couldn't be another postseason where he was amazing, he was carrying the whole thing on his back, and the Knicks get bounced, and it's like, when is somebody going to show up? When is Brunson going to get some help? I think there was some introspection there on his part, and he was like, I have the guys who can help me. I have to let them help me. Like, I have to be. And it's not about so much him being a facilitator. It's almost about him taking the hand off the wheel and letting him have a co-partner, a co-driver of the offense. And then when you mix in what Mike Brown I'm sure Mike Brown and Jalen Brunson have had discussions, and Mike Brown has told him what the vision was for the offense, what he sees in Karl-Anthony Towns, how it could help everybody. Like you from day one have been talking about Karl-Anthony Towns as a passer, and you and I have had debates, disagreements about Jalen Brunson, how adept he is as a passer. But I think that relative to position, we both agree Towns is probably the superior passer. And I think that that's been a way that they've been able to get these maximized versions of Hart and of of Bridges and OG Anunoby and now Deuce McBride after that crazy game 4. Like, they knew they needed all these guys to win a championship, and they found a way to do it with Brunson remaining a super impactful version of himself. And so I think that Brunson's not going to get the credit. Ironically, he's not going to get the credit that he was getting in past seasons when he was doing it all by himself. But I think he actually deserves more credit because he has empowered the entire team.
It's really interesting. Like, I think there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. I think that I think that a lot of his offensive value and impact does come, or most of his offensive value and impact does come from what he does with the ball in his hands and his ability to create shots and to be able to take no advantage and turn it into an advantage single-handedly. When teams play, in my opinion, poor defense on him, send blitzes to his face, for example, or a lot of that comes from the fact of just teams see him as a threat with the ball in his hands, a guy who you give him the ball and you try to put anybody on him and you don't really feel comfortable with it because he can get to a high percentage shot, maybe not the most efficient shot, but he can get to a high percentage shot, a shot that he can make at a decent rate of time. And those guys, I do think a ton of their value really does come from what they do with the ball. That being said, I think that Brunson has kind of always toggled. I don't think this is like the first time he's done this. I think he's always, I think that his issue has been, it hasn't always been at the right time and to the right, I'm trying to think of the right word for it. I can't think of the right word for it, but it hasn't been at the right time and with the right like effectiveness insofar as like starting the game, we see things just running almost purely through Towns. And that makes sense because Towns has the advantage when you have a 5 on him. You know, we just did a video essay where we talked about this. You have a 5 on him. He's pulling that rim protector away from the rim. Now you have a huge advantage as a team because their biggest guy, their guy is going to defend shot attempts at the rim, the highest value shot in basketball. That guy is nowhere to be found. He's way out there on the perimeter, 24, 25 feet away from the rim sometimes. And so that's going to make Bridges, Hart, and OG and even Brunson way more effective as players in that condition. So you're leveraging that ability, and that's the game plan. So to me, and this is, it's so weird because it's like I'm taking credit away from Brunson. I don't feel like I am, because I feel like I've credited Brunson in this way before. I don't think he's like a selfish player or a guy who refuses to play in this way or just wants to play as like, you know, this kind of hero ball like style. I really think it's been a coaching issue, like for the most part, in my opinion. And so now the strategy going into games is Towns is going to run the ship. Towns is going to do this, and Jalen's going along with it, which is great. But like, I don't think he wouldn't go along with it. I don't think he'd be like, I don't think if it was last season, Tibbs would be like, okay, Towns going to, you know, operate from this is where the advantage is. This is how we're going to operate. And Brunson would be like, well, when he passes me the ball, I'm going to go one-on-one. I don't care. Like I'm going to do my own thing. I don't think that's what would have happened. I think he would have just played it the way that he was supposed to play it. But that's never been the approach. The approach has been, Jalen, we need you to create the offense. We need you to get things going. And so I don't think he's had an unwillingness to toggle. I think he does toggle, but it's been more like up to his discretion as opposed to the approach offensively of the team, of the coaching staff, and the way that they want to stylistically try to win games on the offensive end. And that's the thing that's changed to me more so than necessarily something coming from Brunson or stemming from him having like a change or like realization or anything like that. Not to say that you're saying that necessarily, but it's more, in my opinion, I would say, a credit to Mike Brown than it is necessarily a credit to Jalen. And that doesn't take away from what Jalen is doing, because I think he's been incredible. But that's, if I was to like weigh it out, that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, a counterpoint I'd make to that And I completely agree with you that maybe if you're weighing everything, Brown just deserves more credit than Brunson in this regard. I'll concede that point. But I do think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but in my opinion, well, this is an opinion, this is a fact. These seasons don't occur like in a total vacuum. They're not random. It's a progression, and these players are growing. You know, their mentality grows, their evolution as player grows, and so if this were happening, like if let's say hypothetically, Tibbs was the coach and Randall was the big, and there was a different primary guard that had the ball in his hands all the time that wasn't Jalen Brunson, right? And then Brunson shows up year one, and they also happen to replace Tibbs with Mike Brown in that season, and then Brown went in a completely different direction. I think I'd lean closer in your direction, but Jalen Brunson has 3 seasons as like, this is my team under his belt. And I don't have like any sort of data to ground this in, but I do think that like there's a very real feeling of Brunson being like, I'm the guy, this is my team, this is my city, and my best skill is what I can do with the ball in my hands. Like, I think that that's just like a very real thing. And it's harder than maybe you seem to be giving him credit for in what you just said, to unshackle yourself from that progression and to remove yourself from it. I think it would have been easier if it was his first year and he didn't have those experiences, but he does. Everybody talks about he's Mr. Clutch, he's Mr. Fourth Quarter, like this is his team. And I just think it's a little bit harder at this point in his career and at this point in his era with the Knicks to just be like, yeah, you know what, we will switch it up a little bit, and that's okay. I will take the role that, because I agree with you, he did do that with Randall, especially in that 23 season. Some of their best moments, in my opinion. I mean, there's a reason that Randall was second team All-NBA and Brunson was third team All-NBA, because Randall was amazing, and Randall can't be amazing if Brunson says, no, dude, this is my team. Like, yes, I do agree with you that Brunson's always been capable of it. But at this point, with a new teammate and a new coach, to just completely overhaul the way he has his outlook and his process, I think he just deserves a lot of credit for it. That's just all I'll say. I'm not really married to any percentage of credit or anything. This is completely intangible, but I do think that like on the spectrum of things he's going to get credit for, he's not going to get enough credit for this, and maybe he'll get too much credit for certain other things and it'll balance each other out. But this specific thing, I think Brunson deserves a ton of credit for.
Yeah, I think that's super valid. That's definitely valid. I do think Brunson, I agree with you. I think Brunson deserves credit for his malleability and probably something that, although, you know, obviously playing with Luka and being like, you know, that quote unquote like second option and all of that, and then coming to a team where it's like, okay, cool, this is going to be my team, you know, co-team with Randall, and then it's going to be my team. There is probably, and of course the success that he had, which was not necessarily expected, you would imagine there'd be some ego that comes with that. There'd be some, you know, this is the way to play. This is how we can win. Look at all that I've done. There will be some of that stuff happening. And to your point, to kind of be able to shed that or to shake that off for the betterment of the team, I think is impressive and is commendable. Absolutely. I guess just to me, just the bottom line, this, like, at the end of the day, players for the most part, if they're not like just kind of like jerks, right? Like, they're going to play the way that the coaches are trying to like deploy them. Like they're not going to try to, I mean, they might try to fight back a little bit and be like, well, you know, but if you're looking for a team to win and they're winning and they're performing well and they're trying to have success, and maybe they've had a little bit of success, but feel like they have to go in a different direction to get that higher level of success, I think they're going to be flexible. They're going to be amenable to differences, even if it's not the way that they've played. I mean, I'll pull out the Siakam example, who I would say, like, again, I underrated players' ability to be flexible in this way, because I'm like, Siakam, like, we know what Siakam does. Whenever you watch a broadcast and he's playing for the Raptors, you hear the clapping and it's like, yo, you got to give Siakam the ball and just let him hold it for 5 seconds, because he's going to take his time and get to his spots. And he goes to Indiana, and dramatically shifting. Now he's a 3-point shooter. He can catch and he attacks quickly. He's not a ball stopper. All of this stuff changes one year to the next. And it's like, what happened? It's the ecosystem and it's the coaching. And this is the way that the coaches want to play. And he's willing to acclimatize to that. And I think most players are. And I think that Brunson is, and I think Brunson, to me, that does show some leadership and some good coachability and all that stuff. So it is definitely commendable. But at the same time, to me, it's like you got to have the coach in place to push for that. If you don't, then yeah, guys are just going to default to whatever they want to do. So that's where I would say with that. I don't know if you have any last thoughts before we move to a different topic.
No, I think that's a great summary. I think that on the topic of deployment and malleability, the Knicks have reached the point where that's going to be put to the test. Like, what they've done in these first two series has been tremendous. And there, of course, are levels on the spectrum to how much they're potentially going to be tested based on who they play. But I think that all the teams left have the capacity to test them in a way that their first two opponents haven't. And so to do this without OG Anunoby the last couple of games, to get an extra week of rest and a week to prepare, you said it before, not only is this like their best chance to reach a final, their best chance to win a championship, but like this is all setting up. The runway is moving and they get to just sit back, come up with strategies for both opponents and just be ready. And that's a huge advantage for them, but it's also a necessary one because these opponents that they're going to have to prepare for are a major step up from who they played in Atlanta and Philadelphia, in my opinion.
100%. I think you're going a huge step up. And if you were to have a concern coming out of the series where they swept the Sixers and dominated them to a large extent for most of the series, the concern would be, were you appropriately prepared for what you're about to face in the ECF and what you could face in the finals if you get there? And I would say probably not. But what I would say is they did show me a lot in terms of the one place where I just never would have fully believed in this Knicks team is we're talking about 2 elimination games where the Knicks have come in and the opposing team is desperate, back against their wall, their season's on the line, their whole, for the Sixers, it's like, who knows what's going to happen to their franchise right now with Embiid's injury stuff. And for the Hawks, they definitely have more upside and they're kind of early, but it's like, your back is against the wall. You have a chance to win this series and be way ahead of schedule. Both these games, the Knicks are the ones who come out looking like they're the more desperate team. They're having a level of intensity and desperation that you would imagine the opponent would come with. And to me, that is not something I ever expected from them personally. That is a place where I will raise my hand and say, I didn't see that coming, because attention to detail and attentional lapses, and these are things that they've struggled with over the years. Honestly, we see it in kind of fast break situations and letting go of the rope types of situations, and it's like, big win, and then you see a big letdown. But we started to see it in the NBA Cup, and I had this idea that the Knicks' struggles after the NBA Cup had to do with having to reach these playoff levels of intensity, and then going back to the regular season and not knowing how to downshift, because how do you go backwards? I don't think players say to themselves, in the regular season, I just go at 75%. I'm just kind of chilling. I'm playing hard, but I'm not going crazy. I don't think they say that to themselves. They just kind of naturally reach a certain equilibrium, and they get to the playoffs and they play every possession is point game, right? They play that way. And all this sort of happens organically. When you go through this simulated kind of playoff atmosphere in the middle of the season, and then you peak out, you reach that level, and now you have to downshift. It's how do I do that? How do I play a little less hard, but still play hard enough to win these games? And I think they really struggled with that. But what they did show is that they can upshift and play at this intense level and beat a team like the Spurs at this, and beat a team like the Magic, who were still dangerous at that time, and all of that. So I do think that they have shown repeatedly through that experience, through the first round closeout, through the second round closeout, that this is a team that is able to increase their level and intensity and attention to detail and all of these things to match whatever the moment is, whatever the team is, whatever they're bringing. The Knicks can bring those things. And the fact that they're not just beating teams in these closeout games, but annihilating them, I think that has to mean something for their ability to play up to a higher level of competition in future rounds.
Yeah, I love that you brought this up because where I wanted to go correlates with it so strongly. I'm not sure, and I don't mean this in like a oh, you didn't know they could do this? I did. That's not how I mean this. But
hey, you can talk your shit, Geoff, if that's, that's okay.
I just don't. I think, and maybe it's just with the bravado of Hart and Brunson's clear toughness and stuff like that. Like, for me, they've come up in these big games and, to me, like, showed they have mental fortitude so many times these last couple seasons that part of it isn't really a huge surprise to me. But what has surprised me in correlation with the toughness angle that you're bringing up is that they've raised the level of their team defense to such a high floor and such a high standard and I think the toughness is a huge part of that for me, when they traded for Towns and we talked about all the importance of the 5-out part stuff, which I still believe in terms of like correlating with their ceiling. But when we talked about the necessity of it, a huge part of that was because I didn't think they'd ever be able to have a level of defense that would be championship level unless their offense was elite.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, when they're defending this consistently, and we talked about it a bunch on the live stream, when Josh Hart has turned his defense up the way he has to sort of join Bridges and OG on a per possession basis, the offensive ceiling isn't as necessary to their overall chances. I'm not saying you don't want to raise your offensive ceiling, but what I'm saying is that I don't feel anymore, and maybe you feel differently, but I don't feel anymore like the Knicks' sole path to winning a championship is they're just blowing teams out and shooting through the roof and creating attempts at the rim with all this space, and their defense is just good enough to hang on. I actually think that they can go against a Pistons team that is very tough and very good and just blew the doors off them in the regular season, scoring an ungodly amount of points against this Knicks team. I think that they can go up against this Pistons team, have Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren and Cade Cunningham, all tremendous defenders, putting Towns and Brunson in weird spots, holding their offense in ways that the Sixers weren't able to, and still win that series because their defense is so good. And I never would have thought that was possible. I completely missed the boat there. And I think that the what you just talked about, the ability to raise the level, the toughness, I think that goes hand in hand with that. I think that they're playing a level of defense that I just never, ever, ever would have foreseen. And that's such a huge, huge boost to their title equity.
I totally agree. I do love this point. It definitely is connected to what I was talking about as far as the intensity and all of that stuff. That really does come on the defensive end. Like, of course, you can play with intensity and sharpness and attention to detail on the offensive end and execute well and everything like that. And they're definitely doing that because, to be honest, like they have the second ranked offense in the league in the playoffs so far, right? Like they are dominating offensively. Like they have had a ridiculous offense. They're third in effective field goal percentage in the playoffs right now, on top of being, sixth in turnover rating. So they're not turning the ball over. They're shooting incredibly well. They're third in free throw rate right now in the playoffs. Like their offense is clicking at an insane level for sure. But it is the defense that makes it feel all so much more sustainable, and to your point, portable into these more harder, difficult situations. It is not going to be as easy to score against the Detroit Pistons. We just know that to be true. And even for that matter, Cleveland's going to be a better defense, in my opinion, than the two that they've played so far. That being said, like you said, their defense has been able to show me that there is a floor here where they can say, okay, we're not going to just get if our offense is not blowing teams away like they have been, we're just going to lose. They can still win those games in a defensive slugfest potentially. I want to talk about something tactically too, because I think what we're seeing with the Knicks is, ironically enough, where you and I have been just kind of concerned all season about teams sort of leveraging Josh Hart, whether that's through ghost coverage, whether that's through like leveraging him to get back into switching back into matchups that they're more comfortable with, whatever the case may be. The Knicks are actually the ones that are leveraging the poor, sketchy shooters on the other end across this entire postseason, which has been incredible. But on top of that, they played the Hawks, where there's almost always a poor shooter on the court between Dyson Daniels and then a bunch of guys that they have coming off the bench. Sometimes there's two poor shooters on the court for the Hawks. We go to Philly, and there's basically always a poor shooter on the court or a sketchy shooter. If you want to count Oubre, who I do count Oubre as like not a great shooter or somebody I feel totally comfortable leveraging or leaving alone, or they play Dominic Barlow or whomever the case may be. But moving forward, you play against the Pistons, you're still in that situation. You got Asar Thompson. You play against the Cavs. In my opinion, you're still in that situation. You have Evan Mobley, who has not shown he's taken a shooting leap as people had hoped that he would. And some of the tactics that the Knicks are doing, where they're blitzing the ball handler and have like a tagger on the roller, so they're bringing like three to deal with the pick and roll, and then leveraging that poor shooter on the weak side corner, and then rotating back to their matchups as they kind of like slow the offense down. They've done that to super strong effect. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of coordination, and they've done it extremely well. And that's really encouraging, because I don't see a reason why that scheme doesn't work against the Cavs, against the Pistons in these situations. So on top of the intensity, there's some tactical stuff that I think that they're doing really well. And I think that carries over too.
The fact that they have turned the ghost coverage thing and exploiting non-shooters into like a huge win for them in these first two series is, again, just something I got totally wrong. And they've completely changed the conversation about their starting lineup through these tactics. The way their principles in terms of helping the helper, pre-rotating, who they're helping off of, are immaculate. It's something I watch really closely for. They like never miss that. They never miss the guy they leave open. It's always on. It's like they're operating on a string, and they all know where the help is supposed to come from. And to me, that would have been the bare minimum, because it's like, oh, well, yeah, opponents are doing that to them already. So this is them just breaking even in that regard. They're attacking the opponent in a way that they're being attacked. But they're not even really being attacked that way so far. So they're getting, from a spacing element, a huge advantage against their opponents so far. I think that goes away if they play Cleveland. I think it'll go back to being a toss-up if they play Cleveland. Atkinson, I mean, I guess I can't even confidently project that, because Nick Nurse had shown in the past that he would do it. He didn't do it at all in these playoffs, but Atkinson...
Nick Nurse is a different character. I got a lot to say about Nurse, but go ahead.
Atkinson has shown this season, like when the Cavs beat the doors off of the Knicks in Cleveland, a huge part of that was their strategy against the Knicks and handcuffing their offense in that way. I would be absolutely shocked if they went away from it. They have the personnel. They start three guys who are capable of guarding Towns in Wade, Allen, and Mobley, while keeping their rim protector in the paint. Like, it would shock me if they went away from that. And my point in that is saying the Knicks are showing that, okay, you do that to us, we can do it to you on that end. So it's not even really a win for you. We're going to break even. The spacing is going to be mucked up on both ends. And guess what? We have Jalen Brunson. You want to create a phone booth for us? We're going to win that battle. If it's two teams operating a phone booth, we trust Jalen Brunson to create offense better than you're going to trust your guy, who's probably more reliant on spacing.
Yeah, it's totally true. And you know, it hasn't reared its head yet. But at the end of the day, as the Knicks move on, this ghost coverage ghost is going to be there at some point. Like, it is going to shine its head, show its head. And it is going to be beholden on Josh Hart to make shots, or Mike Brown to potentially go in a different direction. And that is something that's yet to be seen. But that's why I really started this show by talking about Josh Hart's shooting and the fact that he's willing to take and make threes right now, or in this previous game, catch and shoot threes, being so critical, shooting them without hesitating or without, taking a dribble into around, into the 3-point line and then dribbling back and then shooting, like just catching and letting it go is going to be really critical for them. And it's been bizarre to me that when you mention Nick Nurse, to me, it's like, this is a guy who literally will just have a strategy or a tactical way that he wants to execute on a strategy. And if it goes wrong one time, he just tanks it. Like it's like they ghosted Hart. Like sometimes it's like one possession, like, and they'll just do it. It's like, oh, Josh made the shot and it's over. We'll just never do this again. Literally, he did it with Hack-a-Mitch. Like, oh yeah, we'll foul Mitch. Mitch made 2. Oh, forget it. We'll never hack him again. It's over. He made the 2 free throws. It's done. Let's just forget about this. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's insane coaching, in my opinion. What is happening?
It makes me think that they have like some nerd on the bench, and he's like
making him do it.
Yeah. Well, he's like, yeah, like Nick Nurse is like, all right, we'll like do things your way, and then he's like, see, told you. It's like John Harbaugh was the first to have the fourth down calculator guy. And there were times like John Harbaugh was like, yeah, I listen to him like 90% of the time, but the 10% is mine. It's like, all right, so what's the 10%? And it's like, but I mean, Harbaugh's great. Sorry, Giants fans, if I think obviously Harbaugh's a great football coach, but I just always thought that quote was funny because I didn't know what he was talking about. And that sounds like what Nurse is doing in terms of like, I don't have another explanation for like why you would hack Mitch, watch him make 2 and then go away from that. That's just I made the coin flips analogy last show. It doesn't make any sense if you either think it's a winning strategy or you don't, or he's a huge believer in rhythm, which is I'm not
probably
saying
something like that.
Yeah. I'm not saying that condescendingly. I just that must be his underlying logic there.
Yeah, it's got to be something like that. But I think that as the Knicks move forward, there will be coaches who are just more, I don't know, prepared for these situations that are just like, you're not going to deter me by making 2 or 3 threes in a row or 2 or 3 free throws in a row. It's like, I'm playing these numbers. I believe in them. I believe that things pan out over a larger and larger sample size. And as we get towards the sample size that we're looking for, we're going to get towards the result that we're looking for. And so, it's going to be ball in the Knicks court to kind of prove those things are either resolved or they're different now. And Hart shooting this season has been real. And but for the most part, if Josh Hart is shooting this way, or if he is not shooting this way, but is being treated as though he is shooting this way, that makes the Knicks starting lineup a 5-out lineup. It just does. And so they are getting the effects of that, being able to have that rim protector nowhere near the rim and allowing them to kind of get to the paint at will. But I do want to talk a little bit about Deuce McBride. There's no way we could have this episode and not talk about him, because I think that sometimes, fans look at Deuce as like this sort of, I don't know, this sort of like, just like a good, solid role player, and not for what he actually is, which in my opinion is like, he's in the top echelon of all additive players in the league. And of course, if he has a game like he just had where he's making 7 threes or whatever the case may be, he's making like sidestep threes and he's getting fouled and making threes that don't even count. Like, of course he has some like absurd nonsense game like he had. It seems like he's like an elite player, but it's not just about that. It is about his ability to space the court, to be the best spacer, the best off-ball gravity player in the league, a guy on the team, a guy who nobody's going to feel comfortable leaving, and is going to make all of those decisions extremely difficult, that when you have to choose and make a split-second decision about, oh, do I rotate to that guy on the wing? Do I rotate to that guy in the corner? Do I tag the guy who's rolling into the paint? Like, what do I do? Do I give help? How far do I go? All of those small incremental decisions are made so much more difficult with Deuce McBride on the court in a way that is not true for anybody else on the team. So that is that overarching impact on every single possession. That's just like a force field that is always there bearing down on the opponent from his shooting and from his aggression and from his ability to shoot over even contested shots and the percentages that he shoots, because they know he's an elite shooter despite him having a couple of poor shooting games in the playoffs, which just happens. So there's that. And then on the other end, being their best on-ball defender, being able to navigate screens, harassing smaller, quicker guards, everything that he does on that end of the court, being able to generate turnovers. This is such an important player for the Knicks. And if they are going to get by the Pistons or the Cavs or the Thunder or the Spurs, or for that matter, the Wolves as they win tonight, they are going to need him, absolutely going to need him. And I just think that's just not something that's spoken about enough. I think people think, oh, he's not shooting well, throwing the towel on him. And I would never say that. I would say, keep playing Deuce McBride because you need him in rhythm and you need him to be an effective player for you to have any hopes of winning a title this season.
Yeah, he needs to play 25 minutes every game, even when OG Anunoby's back. Like he and Mitchell Robinson against these better teams, aside from the starters, like that's their core seven. I love the minutes Shamet's given them. I think Shamet gives them an element of shooting. Well, it's just different than Deuce. Like I think Deuce is a better spacer, but I think the way Shamet moves and he can shoot on the catch, like moving side to side, is sort of different than Deuce. And I think I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it adds an element, and I can see how that could be useful when you're coming up with tactics. I think Deuce, his defense is underrated, like by Knicks fans especially. Like the Knicks, after they won game 3 and people were running through the game and who was helping them, and Deuce was awful offensively in that game. Like it was his first start and he brought nothing offensively in terms of active output. His defense was still really good, and his defense is like always really good. I thought his defense was a huge part to holding the Sixers down, and I think he's more versatile on that end of the court than people give him credit for in terms of who he guards. He was making all sorts of switches onto Paul George and contests, and he, in my opinion, did the best job guarding Maxey. I thought that I just think his defense is so important. We always talk about the screen navigation. Obviously, that's important as they go further. You're going to need someone who can get around those screens. You can't have Mikal dying the way he does on the screens. Hart's improvement has helped there a lot because I think Hart is better at navigating those screens, especially when he's dialed in than Bridges is. But most importantly, I'm going to have to repeat something I've said so many times. Deuce McBride's impact for your team just it is impossible to gather by watching. Like it's just not something that you can, and players like Deuce, I'm not going to act like he's the only one. There are all sorts of players throughout the league who are like this, but Knicks fans have been very spoiled in this regard. They had Quentin Grimes in 23. They had Dante DiVincenzo in 24. They had quickly, like in the last 5 years, they've had so many of these types of players, and credit to Leon Rose for sort of seeking those guys out or falling into them. But when he's on your team and he's getting treated the way he is, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter if his shots aren't going in, but it matters less. And the only time it really matters is those moments when Mike Brown is like either like, oh, he made a shot, let's run a play through him, or he's struggling, let's get the ball, let's put the ball in his hand. Like, just stop putting the ball in his hands. He's right now at this point in his career, that's not how he's helping you. And that is how he hurts you, because you can see the deer in headlights looks he gets sometimes. Sometimes he'll like get by his defender in the pick and roll, get 2 feet near the free throw line, then be like, what do I do now? Where do I go? There's nowhere to go. And it's like, yeah, we can't be putting him, the Knicks can't be putting him in these positions. The way he helps you, ironically, is passively. It's him standing in the corner and his defender being terrified to leave him, because if he stunts, a contested layup turns into an open 3, and that's a math problem you lose at almost every single time. And so the effect that he has on his teammates, if you run through the Wowie data, there is a reason that forever all the players play better when they play next to him. They all do. It's crazy. Like they all just share the court with him, and all of a sudden they make threes at a higher rate, and they're more efficient, and they're better versions of themselves. And it's like, well, that's counterintuitive. I know Deuce isn't actively creating shots for them. He's not this great on-ball distributor. He's not a playmaker. Yeah, he's playmaking in a totally different way. And I think this subtype of player is super underappreciated throughout the league.
Yeah, I that's perfectly said. Totally agree. I think it is archetypal, just like undervaluing area where just I don't want to say like the league hasn't caught up to it yet, but it does kind of feel like that. And
no, I'm sorry. No, the league hasn't caught up to it yet. There's like it's like OKC who gets it, and then there's no for Kelly Oubre to start over Quentin Grimes is just like they're seeing Kelly Oubre and what he can do with the ball in his hands, and they're seeing Quentin Grimes and what he can do with the ball in his hands. And they're like, oh well, Oubre must be better. I mean, he is like a couple inches taller, and and I'd rather have the ball in his hands. And it's like, okay, you have Tyrese Maxey, you have Paul George, you have Joel Embiid. They should have the ball all the times. How do we make their life easier? Oh, I don't know. What if you had a guard who can just stand there and his defender will never leave him, as opposed to a big wing who defenders leave all the time to make it harder on your main guys? So it's like Philly's not the only version of this. You've got Toronto running ads for Brandon Ingram as their all-star when their best offensive player is the guy who every single possession is making his teammates better without having the ball in his hands. So there's 28 other teams who don't fully appreciate this archetype of player. And it's OKC who just keeps taking them from everybody else. They've got like 37 of them just waiting. If Isaiah Joe gets hurt, they'll just be like, oh, I guess, well, Case Wallace, you're in, and it's just, they've got a million of them. And Deuce McBride is slept on by a large portion of Knicks fans. He, in my opinion, has been undervalued by his franchise since he's been on the like since he's joined the rotation and proved that he's going to bring you this impact. And for Knicks fans' sake, I hope that if they face some adversity, the answer isn't, well, we don't think we can put the ball in his hands and he'll thrive. And he had a bad shooting game, so I guess we just got to look elsewhere. Because for the most part, on both sides of the ball, he helps you on a per possession basis at a very, very high level.
Yeah, I don't even have anything to add to that. This is a great rant. We're in playoff mode. We're like the Knicks right now. We're in playoff mode. Jeff's cooking. The last thing I want to say on this is, I think, and this might sound objectionable to Knicks fans, but at least I know that if you're listening at this point in this late state of this pod right now, you're used to me saying things that are slightly objectionable and you don't take offense to it, and know that, if you leave a comment, I'll engage with you in a reasonable way, whether agree or disagree. But hopefully it's not taken this way. I really love about this Knicks team and am excited to watch them and excited to see how they compete and contend for the rest of the playoffs. And it would be great to see this team win a title. And the reason for that is because I think this is one of the flattest teams hierarchically in the league and would be one of them to win a title in terms of the difference in, overall impact or goodness from their top to like their seventh player or whatever the case may be. And that feels like a shot at Jalen Brunson, but I see a lot of this, like, what's the quote about, like, everyone's better than Brunson until it's time to be better than Brunson. And like, I get where it comes from, because Brunson's such an incredible clutch player and has bailed the Knicks out repeatedly. And it's totally true. Offensively, Brunson's clearly, in my opinion, the best offensive player on the team. But basketball obviously goes, on two sides of the court. And I think as far as overall how good the players are, there is. If you go from Towns to Brunson to OG to Deuce to Bridges to Hart to Mitchell Robinson, like, these guys are not super far from all of each other. I mean, maybe Hart and Robinson a little bit of a step down, but like, if you just take it, like, they're incrementally different from one another in terms of the overall impact that they make on the game. And being able to see this team hit you with just like all of them, just say like, yeah, OG's going to dominate this game. Like, oh yeah, Deuce is going to hit 7 threes and dominate this game. Bridges is going to dominate this game from the mid range and even run pick and rolls. Like, Brunson's obviously going to dominate this game through his facilitation or his shooting and scoring. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to dominate this game through his playmaking and his passing and defensively what he can do. And Josh Hart's going to dominate this game through pushing the ball in transition and locking up physical wings and doing everything that he does. He's going to get 10 rebounds and, you know what? He's also going to make 4 threes in this game. It's like, to be able to see a team that's relatively evenly distributed. I think there is a hierarchy, but relatively evenly distributed across the talent and impact that they have is just really cool and meshes with what I like about basketball, where it's not like we have this one hero and he's the hero and he's going to fix everything. He's going to save us every single time. It's like Brunson does do that offensively, but overall, this team has a bunch of heroes that are all really, really good and are playing together the best collective basketball that we've seen them play, in my opinion. And that's something that's really cool about this team that I don't think is really discussed very much.
Yeah, in my opinion, the worst part about the playoffs, because of a couple things, our results-oriented nature as a species or as a culture, and then our maybe newfound general negativity. Like, we basically look at the results of a playoff series or even a game, because we now live in an instant reaction world where every game is an indictment or a referendum on whoever loses.
Yep.
And then we work backwards. Like, so who is on the winning team? Well, that the players on that team must be better than the guys who are on the losing team. And I just think unfortunately, I just think for the most part, we just kind of have to ignore that sort of rhetoric, because to be honest, I don't think there's no common ground there, I guess. Like, there's no like reasoning like, hey, like, is it possible that the not best player was on the team that won? Could that have happened? And, of course, ironically, the only times that's happened in Jalen Brunson's career have been the series he's lost, like nobody, it's not like any Knicks fan was like, oh, I guess Tyrese Halliburton is better than Jalen Brunson. Like, that never occurred, obviously, because, well, for obvious reasons. So I guess my point is that it is a frustrating aspect of trying to analyze the game, because that's just so far from how I view things. I don't see these similarly. I didn't view the 2015 AFC Championship as Peyton Manning versus Tom Brady. It was the Broncos versus the Patriots. And I didn't come away from it thinking, yeah, that proves to me that Peyton Manning is better than Tom Brady at the time. It's a lot more. The thing I love the most about basketball is how nuanced it is and how many intricacies there are and how much deeper it now is than, we're going to have Jalen Brunson, you got Donovan Mitchell, and whoever wins the series, that means that player is better than the other one. I don't view things that way. And unfortunately, or fortunately, wherever you come down on this, Jalen Brunson kind of unfairly gets put in a lot of these conversations and is a victim of the fallout of that, because you have a lot of Knicks fans who will say, well, the Knicks won this series, so that means Jalen Brunson is the best player in the league. And then you have not Knicks fans who are like, oh, I'm so sick of this. I'm gonna underrate Brunson. And that's sort of where we started this show, with me saying, like, Brunson might be overrated or he might be underrated depending on what your perspective is. But what I know is that he's an amazing basketball player, and I've never not felt like the Knicks. Jesus, that was a lot of negatives. We're 57 minutes in. I've never felt like the Knicks can't win a championship with him as their best player. And interestingly enough, from an impact perspective, I'm not sure that Brunson's been their best player in these first two rounds. And that might be objectionable to people still listening, but that's not, Brunson hasn't been great. It's just Towns, unlocked and maximized, has been that great. And the Knicks can win a championship with Brunson at his best and Towns at his best. And from a Knicks perspective, I don't necessarily care who is viewed as the best. I just know that they can win with both of them at their best.
Yeah, I love it ending on that note, because I totally agree. I don't care who's the best on the Knicks. Like, if you're a Knicks fan, I'm not sure why it's like, well, I'm only willing to win if this guy is the best player. It's like, right. Listen, you could win a title and it'd be completely ambiguous and ambivalent. Like, who was the best? Who deserved the MVP? Who was, like, that's a really cool situation to be in, because that means you have a lot of really excellent players. So that's super exciting for Knicks fans. And as far as exciting for a high hand theory, if you're listening to this point, would love if you've subscribed. If you're not subscribed already, would love if you leave a comment, because we respond to every single one of those. And we have tons of content coming for the rest of the playoffs. The Knicks are moving on in another round, so we'll be talking plenty about them. We have live streams, video essays we're producing at a higher rate now. and podcasts we're going to be producing at a higher rate. So we're super excited to move forward throughout the playoffs, and hopefully you stick with us, and we're going to be dropping stuff all playoffs long, all postseason long, all throughout the NBA finals and beyond. So appreciate you for being here. And if you're a Knicks fan, it's a time to be very, very excited. For Geoff, I'm XJ, and this has been Hot Hand Theory.